In the summer of 1996, two college kids near Kennewick, Washington discovered a human skull that would inadvertently fuel a heated controversy that lasted over 2 decades. Discovered along the banks of the Columbia River, the nearly complete skeletal remains were soon discovered to be nearly 10,000 years old, one of the oldest complete skeletons to be discovered in the United States. The skeletal remains are now commonly referred to as the Kennewick Man. The first person to analyze a skeleton was Dr. James Chatters, a forensic anthropologist. He initially thought the skeleton belonged to someone of European descent based on the caucasoidal appearance of the skull. Chatters even went as far as to say that he may have looked a lot like the actor Patrick Stewart. After radiocarbon dating found the Kennewick Man to be over 9,000 years old, it led to many questions about our understanding of who was present in America at the time, since as far as we knew, Native Americans were here first. Initially, scientists believed him to be of European descent, while some thought he may be related to the Japanese Ainu people or Polynesian people. However, the Umatilla and several other tribes claimed him to be their ancestor, since he was found on their territory, and their oral history goes back farther than the age of the Kennewick Man. They also believed that their people had been here since the beginning of time. Since the remains were found on federal land, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers seized control over the Kennewick Man's remains, and they decided unilaterally, based on the radiocarbon dating, to return his remains to the Umatilla people. This decision sparked what would be a long and drawn-out legal battle led by Douglas Owsley over the right to analyze the Kennewick Man's remains. The issues surrounding the Kennewick Man are so much more than a simple case of respecting people's cultural and religious beliefs versus scientists' desire to learn more about human history. Initially, I thought the preliminary evidence of skull shape was sufficient enough to cast doubt on the origin of the Kennewick Man's remains, and that should have been an open and shut case. I had also thought that the Native Americans were just being close-minded and perhaps more concerned that the impact that this discovery would have on their beliefs. However, after reading David Thomas's book Skull Wars, I was better able to understand the Native American viewpoint. In his book, Thomas pointed out the many flaws in the science of analyzing and comparing skull shape to race. For example, although it is possible to somewhat accurately identify someone's race based on their skeletal remains, this same concept can't be applied to a nearly 10,000-year-old skeleton, especially since there's no other data from that time period to compare it to. It was proven over 50 years ago by Franz Boas that skull shape can change rapidly based on environment, even from generation to generation, making it more than likely that any ancient ancestors of Native Americans would have a different skull shape than their modern-day descendants. It's this use of inaccurate skull science that helped further dehumanize the Native American people in the eyes of the Americans. Thomas also helps map out much of the other issues that early science and anthropologists have caused for Native Americans, such as the rampant grave robbing and desecration of Native American remains, the subhuman treatment of indigenous peoples based on the dubious science like Samuel Morton's grossly inaccurate correlation between skull size and intelligence, the systematic loss of cultural lands based on the misguided intentions of trusted anthropologists such as Alice Fletcher. It makes sense that the Native American people would be hesitant to trust the intentions of modern-day scientists, and even though much of these criticisms and concerns are completely justified, does this automatically mean that the modern-day scientists are always in the wrong when it comes to Native American issues? There is no real proof that the Kennewick Man is in fact an early member of the Northwestern tribes making claims to these remains. Based on their oral history, they have been here since the dawn of time, when we in fact know this to be impossible. Even initially assuming that the Kennewick Man was a Native American, with no culturally significant evidence to indicate any sort of tribal or religious affiliation, how are we to know if a 9,000-year-old man was even part of the same existing culture that is present today? This is one of the resounding concerns of the scientists involved with the Kennewick Man controversy. Do the Native Americans automatically have a monopoly on all the remains found in the Americas? Does this mean that science should be forced to blindly follow what the Native Americans believe based on the sins of our predecessors or feelings of guilt? Of course, Native American culture should be respected, and the desecration of any grave is a terrible thing. But in cases like the Kennewick man, where his remains were exposed by natural erosion, the scientists weren't disturbing the remains of some known Native American burial site. If anything, the scientists had a right to figure out whether the remains had any significant link to the Native Americans before their immediate reburial. Since the remains that old are so far and few between, little is known about who was present in the area that far back, other than what is believed by the Native American tradition. Since there is no actual proof available, there could be a distinct possibility that he was in fact not related to the Native Americans at all. Therefore, I believe that legally and even morally, the scientists did have a right to at least analyze the remains in ways to help prove his origin. This is also why, even with the most recent DNA study, which did in fact show the Kennewick man was more closely related to the Colville tribe involved in the legal dispute, doesn't conclusively demonstrate a true tribal affiliation, but it should, however, morally speaking, be sufficient enough for the scientists to drop the suit and allow them to rebury their ancestor in good faith, perhaps in hope of patching the anthropologist and Native American relationship one day.